on a beautiful morning in the small town of Willow Creek. Amara, a 12-year-old girl with bouncy curls and bright, curious eyes, was walking her beloved dog, Marley, in the park near her home. Marley was a golden Labrador, always loyal and cheerful. To Amara, Marley wasn't just a companion but also a protector, standing by her through all her joys and sorrows. That day, the park was bustling with families, children playing, and adults relaxing under the sunlight. Amara loved leading Marley along the winding stone paths, greeting familiar faces. Every step she took radiated joy. Little did she know, however, that this day would change her life forever. At a corner of the park, a group of police officers was patrolling. Among them was David Hayes, a middle-aged officer with a cold, sharp gaze and a stern demeanor. David carried an excessive sense of vigilance, especially toward those who didn't share his skin color or social standing. To him, even the smallest actions could be threats. As Amara and Marley approached the area, Marley suddenly barked loudly, perhaps startled by David's shadow or picking up the scent of his uniform. Amara quickly tugged Marley back, gently stroking him to calm him down. But the barking had already drawn David's attention. He turned, his eyes filled with suspicion. "You there! Stop!" David's commanding voice rang out. Amara froze, her legs trembling. She didn't understand what was happening. "Yes, sir? Is something wrong?" she asked in a soft, polite tone. "Your dog is causing a disturbance. Don't you know that could be dangerous to others?" David stepped closer, his voice growing harsher. "No, sir. Marley didn't do anything. He was just barking. I'm sorry if we disturbed anyone." Amara apologized, bowing her head, trying to remain calm. However, her apology didn't appease David. In his eyes, this wasn't just a barking dog but a sign of defiance. Without warning, David drew his gun. "No, sir. Please don't," Amara cried, tears streaming down her face. But it was too late. The gunshot rang out, sharp and cruel. Marley collapsed, blood staining the green grass. Amara rushed to her dog, cradling his body as it grew cold, sobbing in despair. David showed no remorse. He stood there, looking at Amara with cold indifference. "Next time, learn to control your dog," he said mockingly before turning and walking away. Amara sat on the grass, tears falling uncontrollably, clutching Marley in her small arms. The people around who witnessed the scene were stunned, but no one dared to approach. No one dared to speak up. Amara returned home trembling, her clothes dirty and her eyes filled with anguish. In her arms was Marley, the dog who had always been her most loyal companion. Now, he was nothing more than a lifeless body. Amara's heart felt as if it had been ripped apart. She passed through the old wooden gate leading to her family's small home, each step heavy, as if she were carrying the weight of a collapsing world. Amara's mother, Evelyn, saw her daughter and immediately ran out to meet her. "Amara, what happened? Why are you crying?" And Marley. Her voice faltered as she noticed the motionless dog in Amara's arms. Amara couldn't answer. She simply broke down, sobbing in her mother's embrace. Evelyn held her tightly, gently stroking her tangled curls, trying to comfort her. "It's okay, sweetheart. I'm here. Everything will be all right." That evening, Amara recounted everything to her parents. Her father, Marcus Reed, was a composed yet authoritative man. As she finished her story, his eyes blazed with anger. As the Attorney General, Marcus understood better than most the injustice and discrimination that still plagued society. But when it happened to his own daughter, it wasn't just a matter of justice, it was personal. "What did you do wrong for them to treat you like that?" Marcus asked, his voice trembling with fury. "I didn't do anything, Daddy. I just wanted to protect Marley." Amara sobbed. Marcus clenched his fists tightly. He knew what had to be done. No one, not even a police officer, had the right to act this way without facing the consequences. The next day, Marcus Reed convened an emergency meeting at the Department of Justice. He demanded a formal investigation into the incident and reached out to his connections in the media to ensure the story would not be buried. The media quickly picked up on the actions of Officer David Hayes. Major newspapers published photos of Amara cradling Marley's lifeless body in the park, accompanied by headlines like, "Justice for Amara." When a young girl faces injustice due to prejudice, a storm began to brew. David Hayes, once arrogant and confident in his position, now found himself under national scrutiny. However, he tried to appear unfazed, insisting that he had done nothing wrong. He believed the system would protect him. But Marcus was not one to be easily defeated. He knew that only truth and justice could bring solace to his daughter. During the investigation, Marcus and his team uncovered a critical piece of evidence. The park where the incident occurred was equipped with a security camera system. They quickly obtained the footage and found a video that captured the entire event. The video clearly showed that Marley had not attacked or threatened anyone. Amara was simply trying to control her dog as it barked. But David had overreacted. The footage also recorded the insulting remarks David directed at Amara, leaving anyone who watched it deeply outraged. The video was released on social media, quickly garnering millions of views. Comments poured in, filled with anger and demands for immediate government action. The entire nation rose up, calling for justice for Amara and Marley. However, Marcus knew this was only the first step. The journey to achieve justice would still be long and fraught with challenges. The video of the incident quickly became the focal point of news broadcasts and social media. Hashtags like #JusticeForAmara and #MarleyDidn'tHeDeserveToDie emerged, accompanied by millions of shares and comments from people across the nation. Small protests began to erupt in various locations, particularly in Willow Creek, the town where it all began. Amara and her family became the center of media attention. Reporters frequently showed up at their home seeking interviews, but Marcus skillfully declined, not wanting his daughter to endure any further pressure. Instead, he decided to issue an official statement to the press from the Department of Justice. Standing before dozens of cameras, Marcus addressed the crowd with a firm voice. "We are not asking for special treatment. We are asking for justice. This is not just a story about a dog being shot or a young girl being humiliated. This is a story about injustice, prejudice, and the abuse of power by those entrusted to protect us. I am committed to bringing the truth to light." Marcus's speech quickly went viral, drawing the attention of human rights organizations and social activists. They called for the local authorities to take responsibility and demanded a thorough investigation. Meanwhile, Amara struggled to return to her daily life. Every time she stepped outside, she felt the stares of those around her. Some people offered support and encouragement, while others looked at her with cold, even hostile eyes. A few police officers in the town openly expressed displeasure over the incident gaining so much attention, claiming it had tarnished their reputation. Amara often woke up in the middle of the night, startled by nightmares of gunshots and the image of Marley collapsing. She began to fear going outside, even when accompanied by her mother. While public outrage showed no signs of subsiding, the investigation into David Hayes and his actions within the police force began uncovering shocking truths. Under Marcus's direction, his team meticulously reviewed David's service record. They discovered that this was not the first time David had abused his power. Over his 15-year career, he had been involved in multiple incidents of discrimination, excessive use of force, and arrogant behavior toward citizens. However, these allegations had either been swept under the rug or dismissed, thanks to the cover provided by his colleagues and superiors. An internal document from the Willow Creek Police Department revealed that there were as many as 12 formal complaints filed against David, none of which resulted in serious disciplinary action. This raised suspicions about a protective network within the department, where misconduct was tolerated to preserve the organization's reputation. Marcus decided to make these findings public, further fueling public anger. Questions poured in. Why had David been allowed to continue serving? Who had protected him? And was this an isolated case? or merely the tip of the iceberg? Meanwhile, a separate investigation was launched into other individuals within the police department. Many officers began to worry, and some even secretly reached out to the Department of Justice, providing additional information in hopes of avoiding responsibility. Pressure continued to mount as protests spread across the country. In Washington, thousands gathered outside the Department of Justice building, carrying banners demanding justice for Amara. Many prominent figures and politicians voiced their support, turning the incident into a national issue. David Hayes could no longer maintain his arrogant demeanor. He was placed on administrative leave while the investigation unfolded. Despite this, David adamantly denied responsibility, claiming that his actions were legal and necessary to protect the public. However, the pressure wasn't just coming from the public. David's family began to feel the repercussions as well. His wife received threatening phone calls, and his children were bullied at school. David started to feel regret, not for his actions, but for the consequences they had brought upon his family. In a press conference organized by his lawyer, David stated, "I was simply doing my job. If my actions hurt anyone, I apologize, but I did nothing wrong." His half-hearted apology only fueled public anger. People demanded severe punishment, not just for David, but also for those who had shielded him throughout his career. While everything seemed to be submerged in anger and division, Amara unexpectedly became a source of inspiration for many. Despite her young age and the immense trauma she had endured, she began using her voice to call for peace and justice. In a television interview, Amara said, "I don't want anyone to suffer what Marley and I went through. I just want everyone to treat each other with respect and love, no matter how different we may be." Amara's simple yet heartfelt words touched the hearts of millions. Social activists, human rights organizations, and even those who had previously stayed silent began to join the movement calling for police reform and an end to discrimination. Marcus, despite being busy with the investigation, still made time to be with his daughter, encouraging and supporting her. He knew that this fight was not just for justice for his family, but to create a fairer society for future generations. But he also understood that those who had protected David would not be easily defeated. A tough legal battle lay ahead, and Marcus was ready to face it. The investigation into David Hayes and the Willow Creek Police Department entered a critical phase. After the internal records were exposed, Marcus decided to increase the pressure. He summoned officers involved in covering up and enabling David's actions. Many of them panicked, fearing the loss of their jobs, reputations, and even the possibility of facing criminal charges. Interrogations stretched for hours at the Department of Justice headquarters. Under mounting pressure and fear of prosecution, some officers began to talk. They revealed the existence of a small group within the department, including David Hayes, that regularly manipulated reports and concealed evidence to protect their misconduct. Leading this group was a senior officer named Harold Green, Deputy Chief of Police, known as the Shadow who controlled everything behind the scenes. Harold Green had used his authority to construct a tight-knit network that shielded violent and discriminatory behavior for years. Under the growing pressure from public outrage and Marcus's team, Harold was forced to come forward. However, instead of admitting fault, he accused the media and public of blowing things out of proportion. But when concrete evidence of his wrongdoings was presented, Harold began to falter, his confidence visibly shaken. The evidence against David Hayes and Harold Green's protection network was strong enough for the Department of Justice to officially bring them to trial. The federal court proceedings drew widespread public attention, becoming more than just a criminal case. It was a symbolic battle in the fight against racism and abuse of power within the police system. David Hayes sat in the defendant's chair, his face devoid of the arrogance it once held. He faced numerous charges, including excessive use of force and violation of civil rights. However, the more severe charges were reserved for Harold Green and his accomplices, who were accused of covering up and enabling misconduct. Amara and her family appeared in court as key witnesses. Though trembling with nerves, the young girl bravely took the stand and recounted the events of that fateful day in detail. Amara's voice echoed through the courtroom, moving many in attendance to tears. Meanwhile, the defense attorneys for David and Harold desperately sought to dismiss the charges. They argued that the actions stemmed from the stressful nature of police work and claimed that David was merely acting instinctively to protect the community. However, these justifications could not overshadow the undeniable evidence provided by the video footage and witness testimonies. As the trial dragged on, tensions continued to escalate. Outside the courthouse, thousands of protesters gathered daily, holding signs demanding justice. Some members of the law enforcement community argued that the case had become overly politicized, leading to occasional minor clashes between groups supporting and opposing the protests. Amara, despite being just a young girl, had become a symbol of hope. Every time she appeared in public, her heartfelt words and innocent gaze inspired those fighting for justice. One day, during an interview, Amara said, "I don't want anyone else to feel the fear that I did. I want everyone to live in a world where they're treated fairly, no matter who they are or where they come from." Amara's words resonated deeply, spreading far beyond the borders of the United States. International organizations began paying attention to the case, viewing it as a pivotal example of the urgent need for police reform worldwide. Finally, after weeks of deliberation, the court reached its verdict. David Hayes was sentenced to 25 years in prison for abuse of power, violating civil rights, and causing severe emotional trauma to Amara. Harold Green and his accomplices received sentences ranging from 15 to 30 years for their roles in covering up and enabling misconduct. When the sentences were announced, the courtroom fell silent. Sitting between her parents, Amara exhaled softly. Justice had finally been served. Yet, for Marcus, this was only the first step in a much longer battle, the fight to comprehensively reform the police system and dismantle the deep-seated prejudices embedded in society. In a speech after the trial, Marcus said, "Today's justice isn't just for my family. It's for everyone who has ever been hurt by injustice. Now is the time to examine the system, recognize its flaws, and work together to fix them." Small but significant changes began to emerge. Police departments across the country announced plans to enhance anti-discrimination training and improve use of force protocols. Several states initiated reviews of hiring practices and internal oversight policies. Amara, despite her young age, left a profound mark on this fight. She became an inspiration for many young people, reminding them that even in the face of injustice, courage and perseverance can change the world. After the trial, Marcus Walker poured all his energy into reforming the police and legal systems. He understood that change couldn't just come from exposing wrongdoing. It also required rebuilding the trust that had eroded between communities and law enforcement. Marcus launched a comprehensive reform campaign, starting with the establishment of a task force that included legal experts, sociologists, and even individuals who had been victims of injustice. Amara was invited to join the committee as a representative, a surprising but meaningful choice. Despite her young age, she made a strong impression with her simple yet profound words about her hope for a fairer future. Meanwhile, opposition from conservative groups and some police leaders began to surface. Many argued that the new regulations on oversight and transparency were impractical and would weaken the ability of law enforcement to perform their duties. Some prominent leaders openly criticized Marcus, accusing him of leveraging his power for political gain. Undeterred, Marcus remained steadfast in his vision. He organized a series of meetings with police departments nationwide, engaging directly with opponents. In one particularly tense meeting with senior police commanders, he said, "If you truly want to protect your communities, start by fixing the mistakes that have harmed them." Marcus also focused on addressing the root causes of violence and prejudice. He implemented programs to support vulnerable communities, including improving access to education and increasing job opportunities. Amara and her mother, Elaine, frequently appeared at community events, sharing their story to inspire others. The changes Marcus pushed for quickly sparked a wave of intense backlash. Many conservative groups argued that these reforms weakened the police force and endangered national security. Protests erupted across the country, especially in conservative states where law enforcement held significant influence. One evening, while Amara was home with her mother, a group of protesters gathered outside their house, holding signs and shouting hostile remarks. Security forces arrived in time to prevent the situation from escalating. But the incident left the family shaken. "What did we do wrong for them to hate us this much?" Amara asked her mother, her voice trembling. Elaine hugged her daughter tightly, reassuring her that the hatred was merely the reaction of people afraid of change. Meanwhile, the media became a battleground for opposing views. Some journalists supported Marcus, praising him as a leader of historic reform. However, critics continually attacked him, claiming he was undermining law enforcement. Elaine, unaccustomed to the relentless public scrutiny, began to feel exhausted, but Marcus, unwavering in his resolve, reassured his wife that resistance was inevitable when challenging deeply entrenched societal norms. He reminded his family that their fight wasn't just for themselves but for millions of others as well. During the tense days, Marcus unexpectedly received a letter from Jeremiah, an old high school friend. Jeremiah had once been a police officer but left the force after witnessing the injustices that the system perpetuated. In the letter, Jeremiah expressed regret for remaining silent during his time in the force and voiced his strong support for what Marcus was doing. The letter became a source of great encouragement for Marcus, reminding him that there were individuals within the system who genuinely desired change. Jeremiah even offered to help by sharing stories of the injustices he had witnessed, stories that could further expose the flaws in the system. Marcus invited Jeremiah to speak at a national seminar with police leaders. Taking the stage as a former officer, Jeremiah recounted his experiences and the reasons he chose to leave the force. He said, "I saw things I was too afraid to speak about. I stayed silent out of fear. But now, I can't ignore it anymore. We cannot protect our communities if we ourselves are the threat." Jeremiah's words sparked a wave of emotion in the room. Some leaders began to reconsider their perspectives, realizing that change wasn't an enemy but an opportunity to build a better, more just police force. Marcus's reform efforts are starting to pay off. Several states are pioneering new police training programs that focus on eliminating bias and building relationships with the community. Reports of abuse of power are decreasing, although there is still a long way to go. Amara, despite her young age, has become a symbol of hope and resilience. She regularly speaks out, sharing her story with schools and community organizations. When asked in a television interview what keeps her from giving up hope, Amara replied, "I believe that light is always stronger than darkness. If we are not afraid and not silent, we can change things." The Walker family is also slowly finding peace. Elaine, exhausted by the pressure for a while, has learned to stand firm beside her husband and daughter. Marcus, despite the challenges he faces, is relieved to see positive change taking place. Their story is not just a fight against injustice, but a testament to the power of courage, solidarity, and belief in a more just world. With the reforms gradually being implemented and public reactions still filled with conflict, Marcus Walker was determined to deepen the changes within society. He realized that reform could only succeed if it not only changed the legal system but also changed societal perceptions. Things were not as simple as he had imagined, but Marcus believed he could continue persevering. Amara, now a significant voice in discussions about race and justice, continued to speak and share her story. She not only inspired young people but also awakened many adults who had lived with prejudice for far too long. In a meeting with high school students, Amara shared, "We can change the world if each of us does one small thing to help someone else. Never be afraid to stand up for what's right." Meanwhile, Marcus and his associates began implementing educational programs aimed at building a new foundation of awareness about equality and justice. He collaborated with schools and community organizations to hold workshops, providing information and materials on racism and social justice issues. These programs not only raised awareness but also created opportunities for open dialogue. Stories of pain and hope, like Amara's, helped people understand that this struggle was not just an individual issue but a societal one. Although Marcus had achieved some success in his reforms, the road ahead was still fraught with challenges. Opposition from conservative groups continued, with many still believing that these reforms posed a significant threat to social order. In the following months, protests against the changes persisted in many cities. While there was no violence like before, the atmosphere remained tense. One day, Marcus received a threatening letter from an extremist group, warning him that if he continued pushing for the reforms, they would not hesitate to take action to defend what they called the rights of white people. This was not the first time the Walker family had faced threats, but this time, the threats carried a more overtly terrifying tone. Though worried, Marcus and Elaine remained steadfast in their position. Marcus decided to hold a public press conference to confront the opposition groups, urging them to engage in dialogue rather than resort to violence. He said, "We cannot change by hurting each other. Only love and forgiveness will help us move forward." Some people in the community began to change their perspectives, but the battle was far from over. The following years marked significant progress in the reform efforts. Police training initiatives were gradually implemented on a larger scale. Officers were required to participate in courses not only about the law but also about how to deal with biases and empathize with the communities they served. These efforts led to a reduction in police violence toward minority groups. Though disagreements and obstacles remained, Marcus saw that justice was slowly becoming an integral part of everyday life for the people. While the results were not yet fully as expected, change had indeed begun. Oppressed communities increasingly felt that their voices were being heard and their rights respected. Amara continued to inspire others and had become a sought-after speaker at many national events. She became a symbol of perseverance and courage. Amara's story was made into a documentary, helping spread the message of justice to millions of people around the world. One evening, as Marcus and Elaine sat together in the living room, they talked about what had been achieved. "Do you think we're on the right path?" Elaine asked. "I believe we've done the right thing. These changes will continue to grow, despite the challenges. But the truth is, we've created a path for future generations." Marcus replied, his voice thoughtful. Finally, after many years of struggle, the reforms had truly begun to change the lives of millions of people. The police were no longer a threat but had become fair and upright protectors of the community. Educational programs on justice and fairness helped the younger generation develop a deeper understanding of the importance of fighting against racism and social biases. Marcus, Amara, and Elaine realized that the reform efforts were not just the victory of one family, but the victory of all those who had stood up against injustice. While the road ahead was still long and full of challenges, the Walker family felt proud of what they had contributed. They knew that a just future, where there was no racism or injustice, was gradually taking shape. One morning, as Marcus walked with Amara in the park, they saw a group of multiracial children playing together. With no barriers between them, Amara held her father's hand, giggling. "We did the right thing, didn't we, Dad?" Marcus smiled, looking at his daughter with eyes full of hope. "Yes, Amara, we did the right thing." And from that point on, although the struggle was not yet fully over, the Walker family had made an important contribution to building a fair and equal society, where everyone had the same opportunities and rights.